Hi, everybody. Welcome to the October 2nd, 2015 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. It is bound to be a good show. Trust me on this one. Let's get a quick take on Denver-based Frontier Airlines being ranked as the 5th most profitable airline in America, 7th in the world, bringing in $54 million in revenue just this summer. Patty Calhoun from Westward, I think a lot of the local folks that loved Frontier as the animal airline and everything else saw it become this ultra low-cost airline and were saddened, and we thought, boy, people would be leaving in droves. Obviously, folks are not leaving in droves. Your thoughts?
Well, I think you charge $7 per seat here, $15 per seat there. Soon it adds up. No one was sadder than I when the old Frontier went away, and then the second Frontier went away, and the most recent incarnation has gotten a big case of the greedies. But I just flew back this week, and it was great from New York City. And there is one thing free on Frontier, which is the entertainment as you watch people try to carry something on without paying for it, and they get beaten up at the gate by the gate agent. Free and always entertaining.
David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. Are you surprised at the positive revenue performance of Frontier?
Absolutely, but it shows that in this diverse free market, there is a model for an airline to succeed with extremely hostile and angry personnel meeting you every step of the way, getting charged for everything. You know eventually they're going to put a credit card swipe on the bathroom door and it's going to be $5 to use that. But obviously there is a market segment that wants that. You know, some people kind of like it when you're rough and mean to them. And, you know, it feels, it's kind of builds character. They don't want this like, I'm flying Singapore Airlines and like everybody's really nice and friendly and trying to make it a good experience. It's like, no, you flew Frontier. You've accomplished something. You made it through that.
Eric Sondland, political analyst. Is Frontier now becoming a badge of honor because people can say they've survived the journey?
I mean, as David's talking, I'm getting a picture of the Bataan Death March or something, something like that. I think what he's describing, I call bottom feeding, and there's a market for, in any industry, there's going to be a bottom feeder. Unfortunately, that has become Frontier. They've come up with a revenue model that works. There's an inverse correlation between service and revenue here, and as service is withered, they've obviously been able to jack the revenues up. So I guess, you know, good for them if that's the game.
Ben Gelt, political consultant, joins us again. If this has made so much money, do you think others are going to try to follow this model?
Well, they're following models that already existed. Their ownership group owns another ultra low-cost carrier, Spirit Airlines. You know, I think Colorado has a certain nostalgia for what Frontier used to be, but clearly consumers nationally and to some degree internationally are showing they don't care. They want cheap fares and they want to go places. And I think really at the end of the day, Denver consumers want the same things, and we're going to keep flying them until they change their rates.
Arapahoe County District Attorney George Brauchler announced this week that he does not plan to run for the U.S. Senate. The announcement puts an end to months of speculation and forces the Colorado GOP to keep looking for a high-profile candidate. Patty, this was big news this week, especially because I think there were a lot of folks in the Colorado Republican Party that were really pinning their hopes to Brauchler being that high-profile U.S. Senate candidate to go against Michael Bennet in 2016. Now that we know he won't be the person, what do you think the reaction is going to be?
Well, I think the Colorado Republicans are going to have to look pretty low to find a high-profile candidate. Brauchler was their best hope right now, and he's a very, no matter how you feel about his politics, really personable guy. This table would have loved a race between Michael Bennet and George Brauchler. Bennett's a smart campaigner, and it would have been a really interesting race. It's not a surprise totally that Brauchler decided against it. He's got a young family. That commute from Washington isn't easy. He can run for another term as the DA. The names you're now hearing are really fascinating because Tim Neville, who announced yesterday, conservative, leaves a lot of room in the Republican Party for someone else to jump in. The most interesting one I've heard lately is Dan Caplis is looking again at a race.
Dan Caplis would certainly at least bring some name recognition. I'm not sure.
More for us to talk about at
Absolutely.
this table.
It's still going to be a lot of fun for this table of 2016. David, whether it be Dan Caplis or somebody else, do you think there is a threat to Michael Bennet that is out there in the Republican Party?
The threat to Michael Bennet is named Barack Hussein Obama, and the $100 billion deal to transfer frozen Iranian assets to the Iranian regime, knowing with certainty that they're going to be used to support terrorism throughout the Middle East and against the United States. You don't have to win a race by having some guy who's a star like Cory Gardner. I mean, certainly that is helpful. But look at Iowa. Joni Ernst was not in Iowa well known at this stage in the cycle. She was just a fairly new state legislator, ran a great race. It turns out that hog castration is really one of the unifying issues in Iowa. And so it's
another reason I'm glad I'm in Colorado.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's completely possible that there could be a state legislator or a DA or whatever, a county commissioner for that matter, who could come and run and do a good race. Now that person will have, at least initially, more trouble raising national money because of their name recognition. But as Joni Ernst and many other senators have shown over the years, you can overcome that with a strong campaign and win. And once you show you're viable, the money will come in.
Eric, some of the national pundits believe that Michael Bennet is a vulnerable Democrat Senate candidate, at least among the other Senate Democrats running for re-election in 2016. But is he really vulnerable in Colorado with what he's done, his reputation? Do you think he's as vulnerable as the national pundits believe he is?
I haven't thought that for some period of time. I think if he was as vulnerable as some national pundits are suggesting, the Republicans in 2016 have a lot of Senate seats around the country to defend. They see only two potential pickup opportunities. One is in Nevada, the Harry Reid seat, and the other one being the Bennett seat in Colorado. I've never quite bought into that thinking for a whole host of reasons. One is I think Michael Bennet is better situated than Mark Udall was. 2016 is a presidential year. Democrats do substantially better in presidential years than they do in off years. 2014 was as good a year as Republicans are going to see in a long time. Cory Gardner is a one-of-a-kind candidate off of that bench. They don't, as John Caldera, our friend, says, that they don't have a bench. They have a folding chair on the Republican Party. We're seeing that in terms of lack of other viable candidates here. And at the end of the day, Cory Gardner won a reasonably close race. It was less than 2 points when everything was counted, about 1.9 points. And Michael Bennet is now getting more secure as it goes, as the potential candidates, starting with Mike Kaufman, then George Brauchler, pass on this race. I think if he was really vulnerable, Cory Gardner was able to read a poll, and he was able to take the pulse of the state and the country, and he decided, he's a cautious guy, and he said 2014 is my year to roll the dice. You don't see Mike Kaufman, you don't see George Brauchler saying, hey, 2016 is the year. And in Brauchler's case, I think he made a very calculated decision that 16 is not his year, 18 is the year. The governor's race is probably the play in 18. I think we're looking for a hot Republican primary 2018, probably between Walker Stapleton and George Brauchler. That's the action. Bennet, I'm not sure he wants to sign a long-term lease in Washington, but I'm not sure he should necessarily shy away from that as well.
Ben, if you're on the campaign team for Michael Bennet, is maybe not time to pop the champagne, but you at least gear down knowing that it's going to be a little bit easier fight, or do you still expect someone big to come out and be a potential opponent?
I don't think they'll be able to gear down at all. I think they are rightly anticipating a big fight. Eric correctly pointed out that nationally the Republicans see two opportunities for pickup, and they're not going to be nice just because maybe they don't have what we perceive as a top-tier candidate. So I think Bennet will have to fight hard. I think one of the things about Colorado, and certainly we all know this, there's a huge number of independent voters, and there's a constant need for politicians from both sides of the aisle to make their case to the people and restate it. And I think, as the other panelists have pointed out also, there's still a lot of time between now and the election. Other people can emerge who can certainly be viable. Walker Stapleton is a name that maybe could come out of the woodwork and run for Senate. There will be enticements from D.C. There will be local people pushing. I think right now Neville is looking at this situation and saying, very good. He looks today to have a great shot to be the nominee, but that can change. So I don't think Bennet is taking any breaths and won't be for about a year plus.
Calling Colorado the nation's funhouse mirror, mini-me, a schizophrenic state of political contradictions, Newsweek magazine's next issue will analyze Colorado politics. The cover of the magazine will feature a headline of God, Guns, and Ganja. David, this not only proves that Colorado is a bellwether state, but it also proves that Newsweek is still in business. So two good things. What did you think of the big announcement and their title of Colorado as this schizophrenic bellwether?
Another anthropological piece by an East Coast journalist who comes in, does interviews with the fascinating yet bizarre natives, and then sums it up for the civilized people in the Boston-Washington corridor. She's been working on this piece since July. I've been emailed with her and on stuff. There's still some basic stuff that is kind of surprisingly wrong. Like she says, licensed concealed handgun carry isn't allowed in Denver, which of course it is and has been by statewide law since 2003. Her morality tale is she first goes out and looks at all the evil right wing, and she makes sure to select the most extreme targets. The Air Force Academy unnamed people who are the Christian aggressive proselytizers, Bob Enyart, the extreme far-right radio host, and Dudley Brown, and presents them as one thing, but then the happy ending is focus on the family, teamed up with Ted Trimpa, the gay rights lobbyist, to work together on a human trafficking bill, and which passed the state legislature. And this shows that really it's compromise, and the balance of power in Colorado is based on those independent, libertarian-ish immigrant voters, which is true. What she doesn't understand is she's presenting this as, oh, what an interesting revelation. That's been the situation in Colorado for at least 4 decades. That's among the reasons why, for example, in 1978, a Republican landslide nationally, Dick Lamb, our Democratic governor, got reelected pretty handily because he was seen as one of these independent, pragmatic guys. And whereas Democratic Senator Floyd Haskell had been called a national treasure by unpopular Democratic President Jimmy Carter, and that was the end of him. And the same voters that reelected Lamb handily threw out Haskell in a landslide and elected a pretty far-right guy, William Armstrong. So her anthropological analysis of our strange mountain customs really are nothing new. It's been the way Colorado's been for most people's memory.
Eric, this particular analysis aside, do you think there are other pundits looking at Colorado as a model on that larger scale when they look at the presidential campaign, they look at Ohio, they look at Florida, other states that tend to say where the whole election is going to go? Is Colorado in that tier, or is this an anomaly?
No, it's not an anomaly. Colorado is definitely in that tier. We are at the epicenter of the political debate in this country. We're there for 2 reasons. One is we are a swing state. We are a purple state. We're a key to the Electoral College, even though Florida and Ohio have several times as many electoral votes as we do. We are still a key state. Secondly, it makes good copy, and reporters love to come here. Would you rather spend your July or August in Columbus, Ohio, or in Denver, Boulder, and Aspen, Colorado? Ask yourself that question. We make good copy. The marijuana piece certainly makes for good copy, and we've been on the cutting edge of a lot of social developments. It probably makes for better television for me to completely with David, and sometimes I do. On this issue, I can't. I found this article, give him credit, give Newsweek, and again, who knew that they still existed, but give him credit for a great headline and a sensational headline that gets people to read it. I thought the article was overly sensational. I thought it was amateurly put together. David pointed out one factual error, and another one that captured my attention was they talked about how the governor's office has been passed back and forth between the 2 parties here over and over again. And all of a sudden, I sort of thought that I knew a bit of Colorado political history, and in the last 44 years, we've had a grand total of 1 Republican governor, Bill Owens, who served 8 years. It doesn't get passed. The Republicans could only wish it had been being passed back and forth over all these decades. So, again, just a glaring factual error. They captured some interesting Colorado characters, from Ted Trimpa to Jim Daly to Bob Enyart to Dudley Brown. But it was very sensationalized, as those characters are somewhat sensationalized characters.
Ben, anything more than an alliterative headline?
Well, I think it does reflect our status that we're no longer in flyover country here in Colorado. I think we do have elements of broader society that are here. We were the first to legalize marijuana. We unfortunately were among the first to have one of the most sensational public shootings at Columbine, and we've since had another at Aurora. So I think there are certain elements that of society that take place here that are very broadly reflective of what's going on everywhere. I did find the article to be sort of light on real detail or grit or any nuanced understanding of what's happening here. But I think that we have become a bellwether in that so many of our residents aren't from here, so we really aren't comprised a majority of Coloradans. I saw an interesting map showing immigration in the United States. 41% of Coloradans were born in Colorado. So that means 59–60% of people residing here didn't come from here. So, the values that are here, the way that you see the elections, the number of independent voters is a reflection of what's going on elsewhere, and it's because the people here are from elsewhere.
Patty, I think Newsweek can take a lesson from you. You have written more than your fair share of clever headlines. What did you think of Newsweek's offering?
Well, they might have gone to Ohio if it weren't for the ganja, so they could get that third alliterative word.
Soon.
Yeah, Eric is absolutely right. People would much rather spend the summer in Colorado than in Ohio, which is why they're going to do, if you're picking a bellwether state, even though others qualify, you're going to come here. It's why the John Benet Ramsey case got so much more coverage here than, say, a murder might have in Kansas. Who doesn't want to come to Colorado over the Christmas holidays to go skiing and cover an event? So it's not a surprise that they would choose Colorado. It is catchy that the fact that the first state to legalize marijuana is here. We also happen to have God and guns, which probably 47 other states emphasize too. So it's not completely unique to Colorado. We have our share of characters. They pick them out. They're not hard to find. This is not the first story that's emphasized our legalizing pot, and will certainly not be the last. I think I get 10 requests a week for someone colorful to go talk to and to say, hey, walk down the 16th Street Mall, you'll be fine.
Speaking of colorful people, Governor John Hickenlooper became the second high-ranking Colorado Democrat to voice doubt over Hillary Clinton's success in the 2016 election. Joining former Governor Richard Lamb, Hickenlooper said that while she is still the most qualified, the email scandal may prove too big to overcome. Eric, it's not that both Richard Lamb and Governor Hickenlooper are suddenly against Hillary Clinton. They're just voicing doubts. Are there enough people like this in other states voicing doubts that she really is at risk, or is she such a front runner in the Democratic nomination race that it's hers to lose?
Yes and yes. She's still a prohibitive front runner, and there are increasing doubts if they're not being voiced as audibly as Hickenlooper and Lamb voiced theirs. They're being voiced in a whole lot of private conversations, and it would not take very much to tip those private conversations into public conversations. There is somewhere between, there's not yet full-blown panic on the Democratic side, but the problem with the Clintons is you're always dealing with what's in front of you, the scandal du jour, but you also never know what's around the corner and what's still to come. In this case, the Department of Justice really holds the cards. I'm of the mind that one reason Joe Biden is looking at this, whatever stage he is in his decision-making process, is if anyone's going to have access to information out of the Department of Justice, it's going to be the Obama White House. And he might know information that the rest of us are not privy to in terms of where the Justice Department is. Last comment on this is vis-a-vis John Hickenlooper, all the speculation was that he's mounting a very aggressive candidacy for vice president. And I'm not sure the way you become Hillary Clinton's vice president is through exactly comments such as this.
I would definitely agree there. I read that comment. It's like, well, he doesn't want to be vice president anymore. So that's at least a good, at least news there. Ben, you've run a lot of campaigns, while they be on the local side. This is national side. What do you feel if you're in the Hillary camp and you see this from pretty high-ranking, respected Democrats in Colorado? These two probably are up there when it comes to respect among all kind of Coloradans, not just Democrats.
Well, I think that they should be nervous, and that, any campaign that announces a plan to be more spontaneous, I think is projecting clearly that they're not totally sure how to conduct themselves. And I think in this case with Hillary, you have a lot of the sort of older traditional Democratic power structure wringing their hands a little bit and expressing concern. I think when you look at some of the younger demographic, they're not really on the Hillary bandwagon as much. You certainly have folks in the millennial group that want to see a female president, and that's a huge priority for some. But my view, and I may be a little bit out of touch just because of age, and the national politic is so hard to digest. But I think that Hillary is going to continue to have these problems because the Clinton brand, has so much baggage attached to it. As Eric said, there's what's happening now, there's what might come around the corner, and we all know that there's a huge history, and God knows what might come out of that history. So, at least from my perspective, and I think the perspective of a lot of my peers, we'd like to see new blood. And I think that's part of why there was obviously so much enthusiasm for Obama. I think it's why you see so much enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders amongst younger generation. And we'll see what comes. I do think that Biden is looking at it closely. I suspect he does know more than the average person. And I think if he did get in, that he could capture some of what Hillary has and pull in some of the Bernie people. So I think it's bad for the Clinton campaign.
Patty, just one more hurdle for the Clinton campaign to overcome, which is also part of their brand?
Well, their brand has never been forthrightness, so it's not a huge surprise that they would have, clear honesty, not the issue. Hillary, as we know, has always been defensive from her early baking cookies comments. But every time she tries to account for this, the server, I don't know how to wipe a server or whatever she said, she just, that self-effacing doesn't become her either. I think we can say safely that the land of God's guns and ganja, they might have wiped off at this point, if they know how to wipe. The interesting thing about Hillary right now is partly because Carly Fiorina is doing so well, people are feeling a little more free to say, I don't have to like Hillary. The great thing about equality is you are free to both like a woman candidate for president and to say, I don't like this candidate, not because she's a woman, but just because there are a lot of flaws in that makeup and her story is not holding together.
Hear, hear.
David, wrap it up for us.
Dick Lamb has a well-deserved reputation for saying what he thinks, regardless. Eric, who used to work in his administration, I probably made him cringe sometimes, but at least you knew where he stood. I think people like that about Bernie Sanders, too. Even like with Reagan, you may not agree with him and you think it's kind of extreme, but at least he means what he says and says what he means. It didn't have to have a focus group to decide how to spontaneously have an emotion and try to mimic human behavior. For Governor Hickenlooper, who endorsed Hillary early because, it's sort of the safe thing, and she seemed at the time the prohibitive favorite. I'm not sure it was completely calculated, but it's sort of a sensible edging away. And Sanders, Hickenlooper, Biden Hickenlooper, or my dream ticket, Webb Hickenlooper, I think he puts himself out there as a more independent guy, which is what the voters in general want, somebody who actually has judgment rather than just following the party line.
And for clarification, just because we have some mixture of roles there, it's Jim Webb out of Virginia.
Jim Webb.
I get you.
Right. Wellington Webb could not run on the ticket with Hickenlooper because they're both from Colorado.
Wilma could be a first president.
Wilma,
female
yes.
president.
But not with Hickenlooper.
I'll tell you what, if it's Wilma versus Hillary, I'm putting a lot of money into donating and working for Wilma.
Well, you heard it here first, but regardless of which Webb hits the White House, we called it right here in Colorado Inside Out. Let's get to our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. Patty, as always, start us off.
A really tough trial going on now in Denver District Court. Terrence Roberts, who had founded Prodigal Son, former gang member, had turned his life around, was turning around the Holly Square area, and then 2 years ago shot another gang member, a current gang member, at Holly Square, and in self-defense, he says. But that guy's not testifying because he didn't like going on trial, even though he was acquitted. Now Terrence Roberts is on trial, and it's just a sad chapter.
David.
The complete mess of Syria which is not just a problem for Syrians, but is a catastrophe for Europe and for the region. And there's a lot of criticism, much of it justifiable, of the foreign policy of President Obama's predecessor. But I can't look at any country in the Middle East or hardly anywhere in the world and say that the U.S. position is stronger today than it was in January 2009.
Eric.
Didn't know David was going there. I'm going the same place. I don't care if you're left, right, Republican, Democrat. I think you have to be concerned and look askance at the foreign policy of this president. There is no adversary in the world who feels less secure these days than they did a number of years ago when Barack Obama took office. There is no ally, traditional ally in the world who feels more secure and more close to the United States. And whether it's the refugee crisis, which has many origins of it, I don't want to lay that all on Obama's doorstep, but Russia's moved in to fill a void, and it's a shame that void exists.
Ben.
You know, I was really disappointed with the Boulder City Council for taking away the bike lane experiment that they started down or up in Boulder. You know, we are fast growing here in the metro area. Boulder is certainly subject to that, and we need to do more to change how we use infrastructure and allow people to move around cities. And I was really disappointed that they spiked an 8-month experiment after 2 months.
Let's see something nice rather quickly.
Happy 50th anniversary to Metropolitan State University, which provided this scarf. And I also had to say, great life of Donald Sewell, who passed away this week. Life well lived.
The panel talked about Katie Atkinson's passing last week. I want to just add she was the exemplar of a person who could work really hard on a political cause and still do it with a good, friendly spirit and understand that her opponents were her opponents, but not evil enemies.
Hear, hear. I second that absolutely.
Hear, hear, vis-a-vis Katie Atkinson, a close friend and a real loss. The publication, online publication, Health News Colorado, they've broken some really good stories over the years. It's been an important part of the local media scene. Their funders bailed on them, and yesterday was their last day, and so particular kudos to Diane Carmen and Katie Kerwin-McCrimmon, two really talented journalists.
Ben.
We have lost some titans recently here in Colorado politics, and I also wanted to talk about Donald Sewell building getting the Performing Arts Complex built. Just an incredible legacy and institution for the city, and someone that directly or indirectly has touched all of our lives, and we should keep him in our thoughts.
Absolutely. And I'll add my kudos to what Patty mentioned, the Metro State 50th anniversary. They had a heck of a campaign putting it out there. I have to give them a lot of credit, even as a Regis alum, and we're already at 138 years. Had a little bit of work to go there, Metro, but a very cool campaign. That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Remember that you can catch any part of the show or CIO postgame online, and be sure to check out the CIO podcast on iTunes. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks very much for watching. Good night.
My name's Chris Missling, and I do the master control here at Channel 12. I run all the records and tapes for CIO, and I make sure that we're doing our closed captioning and streaming to the web. I always check the slate and make sure it matches the day and episode that we're taping for that day. This is our multi-viewer where I can watch the studio feed plus all of my recorders, and I can just watch all my different feeds all at once, plus the live signal which is going out over the air, which I'm also responsible for. They won't start until I'm rolling.
Thank you, Master Control.
Now we're in the show, and I'm just checking up there to make sure all my records are good and that everything looks good. I'm watching my live streaming here. There's going to be a delay, but it looks like it's working.
Hi, I'm Steven, and I'm here behind the scenes for CIO Friday. We are in the server room right now. This is the heartbeat. I don't know if you can hear it. You hear it? No? Okay. If anyone told you that they have the magic, they were wrong. This is where the magic is at, especially Dominic. If he said magic anywhere in his interview thing, that was wrong. Magic is here. So, when Chris, our master control operator, which you just saw, hits record on his computer, the software sends a signal to our video server. This is our video server here. These blues are sexy. So that's how he records our shows here. That's how they record shows coming down from the satellites that they air later. And this is also where CIO plays out when we broadcast it. The other piece of equipment in here that is part of CIO is our switcher. This is our mainframe for the switcher. And if we look behind the switcher, you'll see the cables that feed it. These are all the camera cables down here that feed the switcher. So when the technical director, which was Tyler in our other episode, is hitting buttons, it's communicating to the mainframe and connecting one cable. Like if this was camera 1, it says route camera 1 through all the effects and then go out a different cable that then goes into our Omnion, which is the video server that we just saw. This is our air conditioning units, and I just come in and I just like stay here. I just do this for hours. I actually hug it. It's nice. But only I do that. No one else does that. Don't tell anybody. I shouldn't have done that. Don't put that on camera. This is what we call the blinky light room. If you watch these lights right here, these will start talking to us. You can find the answers to everything in the universe here, but you can't take it out of the room. It's weird. It's frustrating. We have air coming down out of the room that erases your memory.
Welcome to the October 2nd edition of Colorado Inside Out Postgame, a special web exclusive production here on Channel 12. Let's get a quick take on the decision of the Boulder City Council to halt their bike lane program, which was hailed by many as a big deal. We usually start with Patty, but we're going to change things up a little bit with this time. Ben Gelt, political consultant, you have some pretty good knowledge about this topic. What do you feel about it?
Well, I was disappointed with the action from the council. I know that it was a little bit painful, or a lot of it painful, according to some, for residents in Boulder. But I think that there's a cultural shift that needs to occur in urban areas, in areas that are seeing fast-paced development and growth. We need to start changing the infrastructure that we put in place to accommodate the growth and to allow people to move around cities. I certainly understand that people in Boulder were unhappy with some of the effects of this experimental bike lane. My view is It was an 8-month project. They should have let it run to really be able to evaluate the data and make a decision made on data, not on emotion and feeling, and I think I'm taking longer to commute. So it's hard. There's a lot of this going on around the country. In the metro area, there's a huge need, in my view, to begin to make additional infrastructure investments to go along with the growth. And if we keep doing things to just put the car first and allow cars to move around, we're going to continue to have these problems with traffic and parking and congestion and smog. You know, Denver just got a rebuke yesterday from the EPA that we're still emitting way too much pollution. So it just strikes me that there is going to be a pain point, and we're going to have to suck it up and have some cultural shifts here.
Patty Cahoon from Westward, do you think Colorado's ready for some cultural shifts? We are very pro-bike, but we're also very pro-car. If we have to make a decision, which way is it going to go?
Well, and we are also very approaching winter. And at that point, bicycles are just not as practical in a snowy climate. So I see, if Boulder realized they were having problems, Boulder, arguably the most liberal city council in the entire state, if they realized they needed to pull the plug on part of this, it's not like they're getting rid of all bike lanes. There are still parallel bike lanes 1 or 2 streets over. They're just getting rid of the ones that really clog traffic. There are still cars allowed in Boulder, and they have to be able to get through Boulder, or I would guess those city council people will be the ones who hit the big roadblock, and they would have had their seats pulled.
David Copeland, the Independence Institute, a Boulderite, so you have personal knowledge of the situation. What's your take?
Boulder is a silver level city, according to the United Nations, as being one of the great cities in the world for bike accessibility, for how many bike lanes they have. And when I've visited, Washington, D.C. or Buenos Aires, where bike lanes and isolated bike paths, which are the best, are much fewer, you can really see the wisdom of Boulder's long-term infrastructure investment in making Boulder a very bikeable city. And that's, I think, something that is supported just about unanimously by the people in Boulder. The problem with this particular project was it was taking a functional street which had 2 lanes of traffic in one direction and turning it didn't expand the infrastructure, it just rearranged it in a way that was, first of all, extremely ugly. Second of all, made it impossible to do snow removal in the winter. Third, greatly increased the problems that Ben talked about, like congestion and air pollution, because cars were idling so long, and was a huge impediment to automobile mobility for little gain, practically speaking, for the bicycles. So I don't think on anything that when we go through culture shifts, the way to do it is by going out of your way to mainly impose pain on people who you think the culture should be shifting against. And that, rather the culture shifts should be accomplished by making whatever culture you're moving towards better and more open and more available, and letting it thrive itself rather than through punitive actions against people you think are culturally backwards. And Boulder's bike policy had until now been on the pro-bike, let's help bikers, rather than on the let's punish drivers for being evil thinkers and behaving wrong. And I'm glad the City Council has returned to the more moderate position of you can be pro-bike without being anti-driver.
Eric Sonneman, political analyst. Now, this is not the last time we'll be talking about bicycle issues. I think just a couple of weeks ago, Governor Hickenlooper announced that he wants to put $100 million towards making Colorado more bike-friendly. We've seen Denver officials talk about how it's okay, it's congested. That might force people to seek other forms of transportation. So this is bound to be a conversation we continue. What are your thoughts about this particular issue in Boulder?
I think you set it up well, Dominic, and I think you have to find a balance there. I'm with Patty in the sense of, I don't know the particulars of the Boulder controversy, but I know that there's no more green city council in North America than the Boulder City Council. And if they pull the plug on this, maybe it was a flawed design, a flawed experiment. It is not a commentary on the value of bicycling or bike lanes in any broad sense. I love the fact that Colorado is a very bike-friendly state. Bicycling personally is my main form of exercise and recreation these days. I love the fact that that anywhere you go around Denver or the metro area these days, you're encountering lots of bicycles. It is a new factor. It is a new part of the urban and even the suburban fabric around here. But I do think there are win-win solutions here, and it doesn't need to be. When I hear a lot of rhetoric about we're going to force people out of cars, we're going to make commuting as tough as possible to force people out of cars, I don't think that's the answer. I don't think you try to prejudice people against one form of transportation. Maybe you incentivize them toward a different form of transportation. But we talked, I think Ben talked about the study that got released yesterday, ozone and smog and all the rest. And that's a complicated issue, but I know what the answer is not. The answer is not to have people sitting in congestion with cars idling. That does not help that problem at all. It's nuanced, it's balanced. I hope we become more bike friendly, but not necessarily at the expense of other forms of transportation.
Well, that is all the time we have for Colorado Inside Out postgame this week. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think. For everyone here at CPT12.org, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching.